This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support.
Hybrid Cloud Show, episode 37. I'm Aaron.
I'm Gary.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Shane.
Welcome to the show about public cloud, private cloud, and everything in between. Our views here are ours and not those of our employers. So Cynthia sent in an email that had some feedback on one of the episodes, but in it she asked the question, what is the difference between DevOps and platform engineering? And I thought that would be quite a nice framing for a broader discussion. So who wants to start me out on what the difference is between DevOps and platform engineering? Or at least, what are either of those?
So at a very high level, DevOps engineering in theory is an embedded operations engineer within a wider development team, as in historically someone who would have been the sysadmin working with the development team to satisfy the dependencies and deploy their code. Platform engineering is building a set of frameworks and platforms, and yes, I've used the definition in the name or the name in the definition, whatever way around it is, but building something that developers can self-service deploy to. So be that a set of Helm charts or a Kubernetes cluster or a set of frameworks that they can use in order to deploy serverless functions, a team who builds that and has great relationships with the developers but aren't necessarily doing the work for them. Now, I think there are probably about 8 different definitions of this, so please don't shout at me if my definition doesn't match yours. It's so much like there shouldn't be a job of DevOps engineer. That doesn't exist. It's a practice, not a job. Having said that, I've had several jobs where I've been employed as a DevOps engineer.
I'm just glad you went first, Gary, because whoever started, we're all wrong in various different ways. So I'm glad you could be the first to be wrong. And I think you're right. You've already hit the nail on the head of like DevOps kind of being more a cultural set of practices with specific aims. And I kind of, in my mind, I view DevOps as sort of bigger than platform engineering. So I know traditionally how DevOps is deployed is like, yes, you've got an embedded engineer, and then platform engineering comes about when you've got lots of teams. Each one has an embedded engineer. They're doing things slightly differently. Things go out of whack. And then it's like, well, actually, we should probably pull all this together as a single resource for our organization. And then for platform engineering, there's a term that's kind of being bandied around at the moment, which is platform as a product. But another way of saying it is kind of DevOps as a product. It's taking what those fragmented engineers are doing, unifying them together into something that they can wrap up and hand to engineers at your organization, rather than being an ops guy in your team, essentially, who might be, or a girl, who might be responsible for that.
Yeah, there's been a lot of job postings I've seen recently for platform product owners, which is quite nice because it means that we're starting to think about the platform that we're deploying to as something that actually adds value to what we're selling versus just being a necessary to get the code shipped and running and people using it. I guess you also said the traditional thing there was DevOps engineers being embedded in teams. I think that is one traditional approach. The other approach, which was really, really common 7 or 8 years ago, was just taking your infrastructure team and rebranding them the DevOps team, and just they're deploying the same stuff that they were on-prem, but in a cloud provider. That I don't see as much anymore, but there are certainly still organizations out there with cloud infrastructure or cloud engineering teams or DevOps teams that are literally just doing the job of an infrastructure engineer, but in the cloud.
Yeah, I think that's where like the DevOps mentality is really important, and platform engineering and specifically platform as a product really important, because I think like if we think back to the old world of engineers like manually provisioning services and things taking 2 to 6 weeks, there was very much that split between dev and ops. And so developers have zero visibility into infrastructure, and the infrastructure engineers are kind of the gatekeeper. You can run a platform engineering team much like that if you do it the wrong way, and you're sort of just not learning the lessons from history about how that hasn't worked. Like DevOps is very collaborative, and platform engineering, and in particular treating that as a product, is the only way to success, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it done really wrong in organizations I've worked in the past, where They introduced this kind of agile development workflow for all the developers, and that was everything was great. We rebranded the infrastructure team to DevOps, but then we never actually put engineers working with those teams. We would just have someone who released the code for application A for the developers once a month, and someone else who did it for application B for the developers once a month. And then we'd release it and then throw it at the test team, and then we'd be the people responsible for making sure that we were monitoring it and stuff afterwards. And if there was, you were the guy who was unlucky enough to be on call the week after the release, God forbid you tried to get hold of a developer at 2 a.m. when a critical application was down, because they weren't taking responsibility for that either.
Yeah, it sounds like all of us have been in the industry long enough to kind of see this, what do you want to call it, shift? It's called, actually, I know what it's called. It's called shift left. It's always shift left on developers. It's shift the responsibilities of ops left onto the developers, but that's too much. So now we have to give someone who actually kind of knows this, and that's called DevOps. And then it was like shift left with testing, right? Now the developers should test their own code. So now developers also have to write and know how to test correctly, not just like unit tests, right? Their own code. And when you shift too much cognitive burden on developers, bad things happen. You get burnout, you get things not done well, you get security vulnerabilities where, no one even thought to look because so-and-so on that team seemed competent. So it's a series of pitfalls. And I've been at Fortune 100 companies where I've seen really good like developer platforms, and they'll do all the work for you. You just point out like a Git repo all the way down to like, infrastructure as a service, which is awesome. Love to see that streamlined up and down. But like you said, Gary, not all the companies are fortunate to have like a product owner for their platforms who think about how platforms should be used, especially within a company that has very diverse needs. So it's encouraging to hear what you guys have been seeing.
Yeah, I remember the first time I came across platform engineering, and it was before it really had a name. This was 6 or so years ago. And I was speaking to a customer who were based in the UK, and they were talking about their common platform that they built. And at this time, it was just a set of EKS clusters with a database, but they were really proud of this standardized way of deploying applications that they had across the organization, and that they had Helm charts that developers could just go and update and point at their repository, and everyone understood that this is what's included if you deploy your application on the common platform. And I remember sitting there and thinking, wow, this is just how things should have always been done. And maybe DevOps was a mistake. Who knows? But it got to this point where like they were releasing 5-6 times a day, where I was seeing other customers release 2-3 times a month, because all of that cognitive load, like you said, Sean, that had just been pushed onto developers, and they were doing stuff that wasn't writing code. And that's not what developers want to be doing.
We have ended up somewhere fundamentally different, though, right, through those evolutions. When you start from the idea of development teams handing off their code to operations teams or IS teams or whatever and putting that out into production, it is different now that we've gone through that DevOps cycle where, sure, people for a while may have been doing all sorts of crazy stuff in independent ways that had no commonality. But now that there is developers doing all sorts of crazy things in all sorts of different ways with a little bit of commonality in the platform engineering team, that is a different result, right?
Yeah, I think the position we're in now is fundamentally better than whatever has gone before, right? And I guess that's partly human nature, because we always want to make things better and improve on things. But I think by and large, companies who do this well have developers that are more productive, ops people who are happier, and hopefully have shifted left still in the ways that made sense. So things like security, putting that kind of at the beginning of their pipeline, observability, kind of much better tooling around that stuff. I think culturally, in terms of not burning out operations people, we've got much better there as well, because they know what an application is going to look like once it's deployed. You've got less of this, well, my machine had this .NET redistributable on it and it worked fine there, or we had this in dev, but we don't have this in prod. That stuff is gone. And also we've got people taking responsibility for their own stuff, right? Like 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined a developer being part of an on-call rota. And it would now seem madness not to have someone who could go and do a hot fix in the middle of the night when something in production was dead.
It's a good point you just brought up about observability. Platform engineering isn't just about deploying your app to Kubernetes. It's also about observability and secret management and all these extra pieces that go into being able to really understand an application and how it affects your business.
Well, it's not only that, right? It's thinking about the needs of developers before they have them. And that's why I guess you get into that kind of platform as a product mindset, where this platform is as much part of our business and affects our developers' ability to deliver as much as giving them the newest laptop or allowing them to deploy in a language which works for them. So realistically, the more we look at platform as part of our overall offering, the more we just satisfy requirements for end users, regulators, developers, everyone involved. And I think that's where we've kind of started going on this next natural evolution of platform product ownership and things like that, because it's all very well a platform team working in isolation, building a platform. But if a developer wants to go and deploy an application written in Go or something, and we're not ready for that, and we don't have a base container image that has the right version of Go or can satisfy the right dependencies, or our security tooling can't go and do supply chain management on Go applications or dependencies, then we're kind of screwed, right? So I guess the next natural evolution of that is productizing it and making it something that someone owns, understands the requirements for, as much as a front-end feature in the thing we're actually selling to clients.
Yeah, if you think about it, it needs to be something that's able to like deliver value, but also like track almost the company's culture and like the objectives of the business. So an example I give is, let's say you're a startup and you get to a point where you feel like you might need to start thinking about a platform. And, initially you've got some hacky engineers who know Node really well and know very little infrastructure. And so you give them an interface, which is, okay, you want a Node app? Just give me a name and a size and I'll vend you a Node app with a database. That's all. But then you realize some part of your business needs some sort of DBA expertise. And so you start hiring in DBAs, and the only interface those DBAs have got is my Node app that just has a size, big or small, and a name. That's not going to be good enough for them. They're going to need to be able to tinker with that more to get more out of it. So like being aware of these cultural changes and these business outcomes and tailoring your platform to that requires talking to people and doing a lot of the traditional product management or product ownership work that a front-end piece of functionality you're selling to your customers would need.
It requires a skill set that developers and infrastructure people generally aren't good at, right? Which is, I guess, why you end up putting a product owner in front of it, because that's someone who does that stuff and they love talking to people.
This episode is sponsored by Insta360, which you may know for its 360 and action cameras. They've just launched their brand new pocket camera, the Go Ultra. This tiny camera, about the size of an Oreo and weighing just 53 grams, is a game changer for creators on the go. You can throw it in your pocket, but it's powerful enough to shoot super smooth 4K 60 frame per second video. The built-in magnetic mounting system lets you clip it on your hat or your clothing for effortless point-of-view shots, or you can attach it to anything you can stick a magnet to for interesting angles without extra mounts. The camera has an upgraded 1/1.28-inch sensor and is IPX8 waterproof up to 33 feet. The Go Ultra's next-gen stacked polymer battery delivers super-fast charging and ultra-long runtime. 70 minutes plus 200 minutes with the Action Pod, and fast charging up to 80% in just 12 minutes, so you can take a break, deploy a few VMs, and be back to recording your next action-packed adventure. The Action Pod also lets you remotely control the standalone camera, and you can use Apple Find My to track it down if you lose it. Now, you can't stick to everything out there with a magnet, so if you want to grab yourself a free bag of sticky tabs and attach your camera to everything from your jacket to your backpack, head to store.insta360.com and use the promo code HybridCloud for your Insta360 Go Ultra purchase. Available for the first 30 purchases only. So in a world where you're deploying multi-cloud or hybrid cloud or whatever, or even on-prem, then there's still quite a lot of room there to have to put different pieces together in a nice, consistent way for the people who are using it. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where if you're staying on a single cloud, that you have enough of that platform in an easy-to-use way that developers or whatever can just use it without the need to have platform engineers?
I haven't seen it yet. If you think about when the cloud came about, and in particular IAC, DevOps was a response to the new capabilities that were being unlocked. No longer do we need those infrastructure engineers cabling servers. We could have our coders do it. And so let's just chuck this responsibility at coders. And then we've learned that that doesn't really work very well because they're overloaded and burnt out, as Sean said. And so now we've kind of coalesced around someone having this particular responsibility. The thing that those DevOps individuals were doing in those teams was building very nuanced infrastructure for their team. As that sort of groups into a platform engineering team, some of that nuance is being ironed out, but I still think, generally speaking, there's enough cultural and enough maybe regulatory or what have you, in specifics around every organization that make it kind of hard to make it generic without you basically trying to buy into another company's way of working. So platform engineers should be building the product tailored just for your organization. Whereas I'm thinking of something like Heroku. If you're we don't want to do any of that, we just want it to be handed to us. Fine. You align with how Heroku works and you deploy that way. So it kind of depends on what you're willing to bet on an external company.
I think also it's a nice guardrail to have a team in place who are making those decisions for you, because developers like new shiny things, and those new shiny things aren't always production ready. You can't always have a team of people thinking through, well, how does this fit into the rest of our environment? How do we make sure that it's secure? How do we make sure that it's consistently deployed? All that stuff. Because I've seen it before where in the early days of Azure, for example, we had a bunch of developers who wanted to use Azure App Service. And they went and they wrote a load of .NET Core stuff to deploy in an Azure application service. And that was fine while they were accessing data that was local on their machine or what have you. But they'd never thought about the fact that we've a bunch of legacy platforms and systems that we would need to talk to over a VNet via an express route that sit in our data center. And I don't know the case now, but certainly 7 or 8 years ago, Azure App Service didn't support VNet integration. You had to use an Azure App Service environment, which was essentially a managed VM that did all that stuff. And although our developers did have full admin access to Azure and the console and the CLI and everything else, what they didn't have the kind of underlying knowledge of is, what does our network look like on premises? How does the routing work to get back to our data center? What data center even is the database that I want to talk to sitting in? So there's a whole bunch of context that I don't think it's reasonable to expect a developer to know or understand. And I guess that's where we were the kind of cloud infrastructure team model back then. But if we knew that developers wanted this thing ahead of time and we could package that as an offering for them, we probably would have ended up with something like app service environment, small, medium, large, and a number of requests per second that we were willing to support within that, given a certain level of application. So I think it is super important to also guard yourself from developers just wanting to try the newest thing and then being disappointed after 2 months of feature development that they can't actually deploy it in the way that they'd expected. And obviously that throws off costings that architects might have done. It throws off business cases for their particular application, all kinds of stuff, because the app service environment was the difference between a single shot serverless application and effectively just paying for a VM running all the time. If we'd known that up front, we could have just given them a Server 2012 VM to go and deploy the application on at the time, which would have been just as resilient and secure and everything else, and actually would have been supported within our platform as much as existed 7 or 8 years ago.
One of the things that I have found to prove difficult with platform engineering is getting application teams to change. And yeah, I mean, that's just an inherent bias, right? Humans don't like change. But, you build this new way of doing things, this new platform, and you're like, hey, this is the better way. Let's switch to this. And, they're like, no, this is just a KTLO app. I'm not going to bother. Just let it go. How can you engage with those teams to kind of help them move forward versus doing the work for them?
Well, should you, I guess, is the first question, right? In your example of just an application that is in maintenance, we're just keeping the lights on. Who cares if we keep a couple of VMs running until they're switched off, right? I think the important thing in that specific use case is defining an end date to which we will go and keep patching your CentOS 6 boxes, or even that we can keep doing that. I think for me, a lot of this has to come with organizational change. And often that comes with a new CTO or a change in management that want to drive things in a new direction. But ultimately, that kind of leads back to a problem statement, right? And getting people on board with what are the common challenges we're all facing because of the way that we're currently deploying applications. Now, we've all had a shot here at what they've been in various organizations we worked in the past. There are probably a million different reasons and a million different things, right? But generally, security, slow deployments, lack of consistency, all of these things bite you at some point. I guess like lack of application catalog is another one of them. I've spoken to customers before who they have no idea what they're running in the cloud because the platform team just vended accounts and whatever people did, they just didn't.
It's not a platform team.
Yeah, I've been there.
So, there's a whole bunch of things, right? But I think really it comes from problem statement, reason for change, and then having leadership buy-in to say, the way your application is deployed, here is our process for end-of-lifing that, working out what you've got, working out really nice migration paths for those developers onto it. There's a real lot of work involved in doing it. And if I'm honest, I don't think I've ever seen a complete 100% migration from an old way of working to a platform engineering style approach. There are always things that just kind of sit around the edges that you're like, oh yeah, that's my old MongoDB cluster. We'll just leave that there. Or, yeah, we don't really care that application's running in Kubernetes, even though we're trying to switch it off. We'll just move it to Fargate because that's cheaper and less management for us. But there are always going to be exceptions, right?
Yeah, there's lots of tricks to this. Like you can talk to your customers constantly and basically make it look like their idea. I think that's probably the most compelling way to like win hearts and minds. I've done dashboards with like leaderboards at companies to be like if I want to deprecate something from the platform and I'll put in like a naughty star or whatever for like, you are all lowest tier. Your team sucks because you have not gotten rid of this thing we want to get rid of. You're slowing down the platform engineering team.
God dang, Shane.
Oh, yeah. It's brutal sometimes.
I love it.
I've done like hundreds of PRs into repos and said, yeah, go merge this PR now. And you got a week basically before we break things. Like you kind of sometimes need to be a little brutal to move forward. But yeah, generally speaking, it's going to be much harder if you don't have like that culture and leadership buy-in. And you can't put pressure on higher ups to like move things forward or have a head of engineering push engineering managers to push a team to actually like adopt these things. Because otherwise, maybe rightfully so, sometimes the product development will always win out. Like that's the revenue driving part of the business. And it's notoriously difficult to try to be like, hey, yeah, we're going to do this new thing in the platform and it's going to save you X number of developer hours or make the cognitive load 20% less. And it means this amount of money is being saved. Like, it's just so difficult to do that. So, yeah, it's kind of throw tactics at a wall and see what the culture of your company responds to.
Man, if we're being brutal, I would have just said make it more and more difficult for them to use the thing they're currently using until it's impossible and they break.
Oh, yeah. Brownout days, they're good. Your service is going to work 3 days a week now. Good luck with that.
Chaos engineering, Shane. That's what that's called.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'm trying to sort of tease apart here is how much of the platform engineering function is advice and expertise and that sort of consulting function within an organization, and how much of it is tools and pieces of software and platforms that people interact with. How much of this stuff actually has to be built versus how much of this stuff is knowledge kept in the heads of people who understand this is a problem space that is distinct from development.
In my head, it's fairly equal, but it depends on the organization, right? In my head, it's half understanding what people need and half building it. But the people who are understanding what developers need and what the company needs aren't necessarily the same people building it. So it's hard to put a quantifiable number on it, but I feel like you should at least do as much understanding of what you're building as you do building it.
What Gary said, it really depends on your company's culture. If I was going to go about doing something like this, then I'd probably be talking to like the principal engineers of each organization to figure out what their current needs are and what their future needs are going to be, because they're the ones setting that trend. And then I can get ahead of the game and I can start gathering requirements from teams who are, in a position to do that. But I would say between consulting and actually building, 50-50, what Gary said.
I guess why I find that odd is that if you've got 50% of this platform engineering effort that is effectively tools, does that mean that, all of these organizations in the platform engineering space are rebuilding in a custom way all of these different ways to try and abstract clouds or abstract platform, create these things that developers internally can use? I know that you can't get rid of, people and understanding teams, but why are there not more tools in that space that mean that people aren't replicating effort?
It's not so much building new tools 50% of the time. It's improving what's already there or adding new functionality. Like maybe you only supported Java apps and now you need to support PHP apps. God forbid, but maybe that's the requirement. Maybe adding, secret management platform into your platform as a service that's streamlined for the partners, right? Like that, who knows? But I think maybe we should reword it to say 50% dedicated to developing a platform versus 50% consulting with other teams to use your platform.
Yeah, I think that's what I meant. It's like equal parts working out what people need and building what people need. And when I say building what people need, I don't necessarily mean taking something completely bespoke, because clearly there's a whole bunch of stuff that has happened here, right? There is probably 10 different ways to deploy a Go application on Kubernetes, but there's one that will fit your business really well and fit the workflow that you've got for .NET or PHP or whatever it is. So it's about finding what exists and customizing that to your particular environment, culture, way of working. And you don't find that out with doing the other 50%, which is the consulting with people and finding out how do they like to work? What does that application look like? So I think there is tooling out here that absolutely does this. We've talked about a few of them on the show in the past. OpenShift is a platform in a box, as example. It might not be a very good one, but it is there and it does exist and it is very opinionated. And I think the reason I don't like it is because it's opinionated in a way that me and the teams I've worked with it on in the past are not. So that's a prime example of why I think you would put so much effort into the consultancy and the kind of customizing stuff that already exists.
Agreed. I actually think as well, we're probably thinking a lot in our heads about developers as those customers, but that's not the only real customer of a platform. Like you may have security teams who want every log to be vended into a SOC to get visibility on their end. And so that's something you'll want to provide, but minimize the disruption for your engineers, make it almost transparent so they don't even recognize that's happening. And imagine that for every single, maybe finance wants particular cost reportings. Platform may need to provide that. It needs to be broken down in certain ways. So there's lots of different customers and masters to serve in the platform engineering team, and giving everyone a reasonable interface and pulling it all together for your company. And that's why I always say off-the-shelf tools can't really hack it yet.
I mean, even outside of security, right, and finance, there's other people in your company that you may not even think of, like field teams, for example. They're going to want to go and be able to deploy your product and demo it to customers. There's testers who want to go and deploy and test the application. They probably want something with some demo data in to do that. There's a whole bunch of different people that we historically wouldn't have even considered as customers or people that we'd have to interact with that actually do have to use this thing and have to use it quite a lot. Then there's stuff like integration with third-party products, right? Your security team might want to use some kind of segmentation platform. You've then got to think about, how do I integrate with that? How does that work? Have I made the right choice of Kubernetes CNI in order to make that work? There's the on-prem networking team. How does it interact with the on-prem network? How am I vending IP space? All this kind of stuff that we just never would have bothered thinking about before, that suddenly are personas in the business that you just wouldn't think about that actually do use the platform.
To bring this full circle, these are very much platform engineering concerns at a very high organizational level. DevOps does not do any of this. DevOps, you're embedded in your team, and if you need an IP, then you go get a public IP, whatever, from your cloud provider. Or maybe, you talk to a central core networking team in your company. That's it. There's none of this cross collaboration and shared tooling that you get from the benefits by using a platform engineering team.
Well, unless you get into the other team's repository and just copy whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
Sure, copy all the Terraform modules, easy. Yeah, it'll work.
Yeah, it's fine.
Well, hopefully there's something in there that clears things up for Cynthia, but I think that's probably time for us to call it a wrap. Before we go, just a quick thank you to our supporters on PayPal and Patreon. And also a quick thank you to those people who've sent in their questions and their feedback to show@hybridcloudshow.com. We do read it, and please do keep sending it in. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Until then, I've been Aaron.
I've been Gary.
I've been Sean.
And I've been Shane.
See you later.